coming back and taking that feedback back to the company to talk about how we can make our products better, and then turning that around and explaining to customers, potential customers and customers, how our products work and how they can benefit from it. So, so we've been working with Payette for a while, and so I wanted to ask Dan. Dan's kind of a unique customer in that they have a single office, which makes this a great opportunity to show just how versatile Panzura can be. And so, Dan, why don't we talk about how you went about figuring out that what were you looking for when you came across Panzura, and what led you down this path to start working with Panzura?
Yep, absolutely. So it was interesting for us when I first heard about Panzura and where it had its cloud file storage system and how it really could help benefit multi-offices. It wasn't an exact fit for what I was looking for, being a single office. And it was sort of, at first, it was sort of like, I'm not quite sure there's an exact fit or need there. But one of the big things that I would say in architecture with regards to data, it just keeps growing. Today I have more data than I had yesterday, and tomorrow I'm going to have even more. And one thing that we've seen in architecture, and Greg, as you're talking about in your background with sort of computers and programming and getting into that side of architecture, or any business for that matter, we're doing so much now with technology and leveraging computational design, doing different iterations, programming wise, energy analysis. Our data is only growing, and it's growing exponentially. So for me, it really came at it from that technology stack of, I have data issues, and that's just growing. The other thing that happens now is, as a project not only goes through design, but as it goes through construction, we're gathering so much evidence of the process of how things are being constructed. We're doing it through pictures, through videos, and the megapixels are only growing. We're doing point clouds and laser scans. So the data that we're capturing just keeps on growing. And that was really what I was coming at, the point of going, I don't know if I have the file sharing issue across multi-offices that other firms have, but I have a data growth problem. And that, for me, was really what sort of caught my attention to Panzura, was the ability to sort of keep locally some data and then start pushing other data off to the cloud. And then knowing too that it was one of the top ones that really knew about Revit and could handle the Revit file system for us, that became very attractive for us. So that was sort of my foray into saying, hey, this is what I need of a storage assistance in that storage growth. And it's funny too, I look back sometimes and I say, especially with architecture and the type of projects that we do, where our projects last on average from design through construction about 3.5 to 4 years. So I need to keep data active for our architects to access, and relevant for a long time. And I've even had some projects that have lasted from 10 years from original design through construction. So there's a lot of sitting there, backing it up, and continuous archiving of that data. So I need to make sure it's accessible to them. So for me, that was my big challenge.
And you look at it and think, and actually that was one of the areas where Panzura first started, right? It's more of a much more conventional, as far as Panzura was concerned. We could solve that problem for you. That was the easy part, right? but you're looking at, buying those servers. And when you talk about a project lasting 3.5, 4 years, that's about how long, a server would survive, right? So every 4 or 5 years, you were turning over servers or buying another one, but you can't just leave the data on that old one because it's going to start dying, right, after a certain number of years. So the cloud gives you that kind of that persistence and cheap, large amounts of storage. And Panzura gives you that immediate access to your backups, or at least the current version, depending on what you choose as a backup schedule. So so that's where you started, and then you implemented Panzura. And so, let's talk about, what did you discover kind of after you implemented Panzura, and where it went from there, maybe in your first 6 months to a year of using it?
Yeah, so one thing you first mentioned was the ability to do almost what we wanted to say, what was important to us to capture for snapshots for data, data growth, and suddenly realizing, hey, is this really just have a particular niche? And suddenly you started to become, no, this can be used with all of our unstructured data, which is the majority of our data. You'll find with architecture, as I mentioned, all the different data types that we grow, it just keeps growing exponentially. So with Panzura, we're able to get quick access to the data that we had now, our active data, and more of the cold data was able to go off to the cloud, but we're able to do unlimited snapshot capability. So we could do, periodic snapshots on daily, hourly basis, and then extend that out for weekly, monthly, and then annual archives too. So we could really go back. It really gave us an opportunity to say, hey, if data changed at a certain point and we need to go back and look at how it was in the past, we can actually go back and get that very easily. But it also worked well too because it was cloud agnostic. We could, choose, and we've seen a lot of development in the cloud infrastructure side from when we first went down this path too. Whether it's AWS or whether you're dealing with Azure, there's so many different cloud flexibility and pricing options there too. So it really ended up being one of those products that, we went down the path 5 years ago, and it's still very relevant. And also, as you mentioned too, with some of the other storage systems out there, there's the heavy forklift upgrades. It's constantly migrating storage from one to another, or trying to archive older data and move it offline. It really made easy ROI calculations on the IT side to say, hey, this has a really good place in our environment.
Yeah.
Greg?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just maybe want to preface it and let the people know, because some of them are asking, like, we are not doing a slide presentation of PowerPoint today.
Nope.
I wanted to mention that this is a very interactive discussion, and not only are we going to have, candid, great, conversations from Greg and Dan, but we want to invite others in the audience right now to participate as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to go and post it in the chat box or questions box, and we can ask both Greg and Dan about how they leverage distribution in the cloud or data management. At the same time, maybe I can ask one quick question while, Greg, you're asking Dan. I want to find out, what are people using for data management right now? Can you type it in the chat box or the questions box, and we'd be happy to hear, and then we can throw that in the mix of conversation, okay?
Yeah, that would be great. So you now you have your data up in the cloud and you start working with it. What were some of the things maybe that you discovered along the way that you didn't realize, might happen and benefits?
So one of the big things, and it was interesting, we all know that 2020 has been like an extremely unusual year, given COVID, given the pandemic. And it was interesting when about a year ago, when I started saying, as a lot of companies we run on an annual basis, what is my thinking for 2020? What are my objectives for this year? And where I started the year and where I am now is not dramatically different. Most of our focus has really been about extending our data mobility-wise for our employees. And really, the only thing that's really changed for us this year is the lack of travel, in some ways, because I suddenly have employees, and I joke a little bit, even though we have a single office, we went from that single office to a couple hundred overnight in the beginning of 2020. So now it really became, with this distributed workforce, is there a way I can leverage this storage? Is there a way I could do it? And one of my objectives had already been trying to extend more of our infrastructure to the cloud. And specifically, we've all virtualized our server infrastructure over the years. We've all gone down the path of either using some sort of virtual server infrastructure, economy of scale, maximizing resources. It really proved to be efficient. Well, the other major area for a lot of firms has been virtual desktop infrastructure. And a lot of us, as people have scattered about the globe, is started to say, what are the workloads that we can start to shift to the cloud? Do you have an opportunity to start to spin up workstations in the cloud? And a key component for us on the architecture side had really been the graphic acceleration. So many of the applications that we run, like we're mentioning Revit, whether it's Revit or Rhino or SketchUp, they all rely on graphic acceleration. So some sort of GPU is needed. And now with the cloud, having the capability of either Azure being able to provide that, or maybe you're using Nutanix with Frame, that these cloud workloads can also be run and leverage a virtual GPU. So what Panzura really offered us is saying, okay, you have your data on premise, you also have your data in the cloud. If we can spin up a workload in the cloud as well that actually accesses that data directly from there and synchronizes it back onto prem, this becomes for us a major winning solution for us. Some of the things I've had pop up in this year is employees have scattered all about. So as I said, we're Boston-based firms. People went up to the mountains in New Hampshire or Maine, to their lake houses, down on the Cape. I've had people pop up in Ecuador, Israel, Lebanon, South Korea. We have had employees pop up all over the globe this year. The alert sometimes is say, hey, do you know you have a person logging on from here? So for us to be able to extend that data to the cloud and leverage the ability to, of people to be able to work from anywhere was really important to us.
Yeah, so you suddenly became to start, you didn't originally intend to use it, but you started using our global file system, basically, you know, whether you intended to or not. And that's good. And so, you know, in the, you know, you found that out, and that's going to benefit you, that flexibility and that ability to handle that situation with whatever comes forward is gonna really help you out. So let's talk about security a little bit. Did you guys, you must have looked at some of the advantages and disadvantages of security, and tell me what you thought of that.
Yep. So it's kind of funny, and when I was thinking about the security side of it, and oftentimes people will ask like, oh, are you doing security as a project this year? And I'm like, we do security as part of every project that we do. It's always like it's a continuous cycle of security, because we all know there's a lot of bad actors out there who want your information. And if I remember correctly, I think Bill Gates wrote his book, Business at the Speed of Thought, and it has to be at least 20 years old. And I remember in the book, Bill Gates talks about how information will become the new currency, that it's not so much the actual, like, it's the information that you hold. And for us, it's information that we generate about our designs, and that's important to us, and that's how we conduct our business. And that's what most firms and most companies are. It's the information that you have. It's the code. It's the secret sauce of what the solution is that you provide. So for us, in saying we need to protect the data and we need to have it accessible wherever we are. So, and I will tell you, for any company right now, you know, make sure your data is backed up. Make sure you back it up again. Back it up a third time, and then make sure you also mirror that data and have it in another offsite or sort of disconnected state too, because you really do need to protect your data. And it's also funny too that, you know, it's humans touching data, it's humans clicking on the wrong thing, it's humans that are going to do something, and it's other humans that are after your data. So we all know there's a lot of bad actors out there who are after that data, and not so much that it's really going to have, in some cases, intellectual property or significance to them, other than they know you want that data, so they're going to hold it hostage for you. So with that being said, you want a system that has the security and can actually retain and give you ability to roll back if you need to, but protect your data.
Yeah, Annalisa.
Yeah, speaking of data, I guess there's just some clarifications here that the audience wants to find out. They want to make sure that, how are you working with the Revit files? I guess that's.
How's Dan working with them, or how is Panzura work with them?
How is Dan and the Payette team working on Revit files? They just wanted to find out if it's AutoCAD or I guess they just wanted to get more clarity about the files and the data that you're securing.
Oh, sure. So one of the things that we do within our project team, or project file structure, you would say, is we try to keep all of our data in one location for the team. So whether it's Revit, AutoCAD, all the different file types, we try to keep it in one location. One game changer that has been out there for us too are some cloud applications like BIM 360. So occasionally, if it's in a completely internal project, we'll traditionally have all those Revit files are being stored on Panzura, and it's being shared for our teams, and that can be accessed by our internal workstations, but using Panzura can extend that to the cloud for us as well. On occasion, we will work with associate architects or other design teams, and those we are now using BIM 360, where we'll share those project teams or project files. But it really depends on the project itself and what makes sense for that project team.
So Dan, talking about security, so there's not only just security against bad actors, but one of the things I often mention to especially single office firms, when you have multiple offices, you might have, say 5 offices across the US, and one of them gets sacked by, a hurricane or something. It's not as devastating, but if you have one office and all your data is there in one office and that gets knocked out, flood, hurricane, whatever it is, you're in a lot of trouble, right? You not only are you going to backups, which is just a pain in the ass, but your backups may not be all up to date and things. So talk about that, and is that a factor in what you were looking at?
Yes, in fact, that's not only a major factor, but a major concern of mine. If I was to put my blind up here behind me, you might get a little bit of a glimpse at the Atlantic Ocean out there. So the building that we're in, and we sit right on Boston Harbor, natural disasters has always been a major concern of mine. Hurricanes, floods. We've had acts of terrorism that shut down the city. We've had numerous events. So it's always been that physical event that has been one of my top fears. But recently, it's also on that security side to realize what can happen to your data. And that was another sort of reason when I first started investigating Panzura and what it could do in its offerings, thinking, oh, wow, my peer firms, they're lucky that they have, an office, say in Boston or New York, or New York and LA, that they can replicate their data back and forth. But for me, when I looked at it and go, I don't have that ability or luxury. I can go and I can do a co-location facility. I can, buy a duplicate hardware and start to put that investment in there. But then that only puts more demand on myself and my team to sort of keep that hardware up and running, keep on a hardware refresh cycle that keeps that current and active. But it really became, in an event of an emergency or disaster too, how are you actually going to access that data? How are you going to get to it? So that was an important benefit to us as well. And one of the reasons we also looked again at Panzura, saying, okay, not only does it give us that cloud storage or extension of our data from our on-prem into the cloud, but it also gives us a way of accessing that data directly in the cloud. And that to us was another continuous importance to us, that we really needed to make sure that not only were we backed up, but we actually had a continuity plan that gave us immediate access to continue. If something does happen, what can we start doing immediately right afterwards? And that was really important to us to have that continuation.
Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of, everything you've been through and kind of up till now, and you went through COVID, and that transition to COVID went okay for you. What's it looking like? What are your employees saying about, going forward here? What's life going to be like after COVID? Do you think next year things are just going to get back to normal?
I don't think we're going to see normal for a little while. And here in the Boston, New England area, we have about 9 months of winter, and winter's just about coming upon us.
I'm in California. I can't even conceive of that.
So we know that people are not going to be rushing out of their homes to come back into the office anytime soon. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it was really some of those things that we're thinking about before COVID really hit, that we're trying to find ways of extending the mobility of the firm and extending that. So I really see us trying to leverage more of the cloud and trying to leverage more of the virtual desktop infrastructure and shifting those workloads. I actually know of some firms in the area now too that are actually looking at almost going virtual, that they're really looking at going, do they need their corporate real estate that they're not utilizing? And really, can they start to operate more in the cloud or free of the physical constraints of the office? I do know for a firm like ours, as I mentioned, especially with single authorship of our projects, collaboration is extremely important to us. There's really no replication for what people can design in person together, and trying to use different web technologies, whether it be like GoToMeeting or Teams or others or Zoom, it's really hard to replicate exactly that collaborative experience, especially when designing. So we're still going to see, I believe, a bit of a hybrid approach. Much like, children are learning from home, they still need to have some in-classroom experience, and really maybe a hybrid works best. I think we're going to see a hybrid approach going forward, but we're definitely going to be leveraging more of the cloud that we can for our data.
Right. So now you have that flexibility, right? You can, the infrastructure is there. You can pick however much. I mean, right now it's like 100% remote. They come back to the office, it's like it was. Some of the people come back, some don't. They're all still working on the same data, the same set of data, and so they're all able to keep that transition should be fairly smooth. I've heard some of our customers say we're thinking about redoing the office so that about 50% of the people can come in, but that 50% to come in change, from day to day or project to project. And so they got to keep very flexible. They got to spread out their office more, but keep it very flexible. You see things like that happening as well?
Yeah, one of the other things we see too is projects have a typical cadence. It's almost like an ebb and flow of the tide, where they'll hit different design, peaks and valleys, and also when they go from design into construction. And as I mentioned too, with a lot of the buildings that we design, they typically will start pre-construction activities. So the team members will start to shift where they need to be together heavily during earlier design. And once things shift to construction, they're more out on the site. They're either at the project, they're traveling. I think we're going to be able to do that better. And there's going to be less of those people coming in. So typically, when you mention like a 50% being a population being in the firm, it might be those that are just, early design projects that will be heavily in the office, and those that are going into their construction administration phases, those people will be typically out of the office on site, or maybe a hybrid between their home and being on site. So I think we're going to see a little bit more shift towards that. We've actually already implemented that, where we have been having people sign up for who's going to be in the office and having all the different rules and regulations. But we do find when we have those in-person design meetings, they're extremely valuable in advancing projects.
Right. That's good. Okay, Annalisa. Yes.
Hi, I just have a quick question. There was somebody was asking, would we be able to do a demo of Panzura? And I just suggested that if they're interested, we can set up a time later on. The other thing too is also want to ask if there are others besides this gentleman who asked me a time, we can set that up for the others. Just let us know in the chat box or in the questions box, and we can follow up with you later. But a quick question from Chris. They wanted to find out what advantages does Panzura have over working directly off the cloud via virtual machines? And I guess they were comparing it with another solution that they have access to, like Azure. So maybe this is for Greg, and if Dan could give some flavor on whether you look into that too.
Yeah, so Panzura, it creates a global file system. So when we started out, we were putting machines in every office you had, right? And then we would sync all that data back to the cloud and keep you working off of those devices. It works the same up in the cloud. VDI has a limited range of where it's really effective. If you start to try and VDI to a machine in New York from LA, you're going to have a very poor experience. It's got to be something that's relatively close. So Panzura can put a controller up in the cloud right next to all your VDI machines so that it's a LAN-based connection. It's just like sitting in the office and writing to a server in the office. But that same data you can host in 3, 4, 5 different clouds. You can host it all the way around the world if you want. So you have a Panzura up there with all your VDI machines, but say a third of your workforce is on the West Coast, a third is in Central US, and a third is on the East Coast. You can set a Panzura up in each location. You're all reading and writing the same data, but your VDI is very close to you. So that VDI experience becomes much better, but it creates one file system. You can't have one file system that stays in sync just by writing data to a cloud drive, right? It's not going to replicate that data for you and keep it synced, allow file locking and things like that Panzura does across the global file system.
Yeah, I think one important thing that Greg was mentioning there is the experience when you are moving data to the cloud. There's different regions and there's latency in it. And Panzura can handle that latency well. In fact, it was one of those, as I mentioned, I've had employees pop up all over the globe. And I'm like, they're like, yeah, you might have a little bit of latency because you are 6,000 miles away from our data center here on the East Coast of North America. And then you try to say like, yeah, you know, the International Space Station's actually closer to us.
A little perspective there.
And that's probably why a solution like Panzura and using those virtual cloud controllers, because not only for those different regions, you can have that data quickly accessed and say, hey, this file's in use. Or if you're dealing with a file like Revit, to know, okay, this can support multiple people accessing it. But it's very important that you do look at that, because it's not only just putting the data in the cloud, but you really do need an intelligent cloud controller to be able to tell files are being locked or to do the synchronization between those different regions. So that's a very important thing to note. It's not just simply putting it in the cloud, it's putting it in there with that proper cloud controller.
Fantastic. And thanks for the quick question. As another follow-up question, it's like somebody was asking, they have a 4-person interior design firm. Susan wants to find out, like, they use currently right now Google Cloud. So they're wondering, how would this work for a smaller firm and a smaller project team?
So they're using Google Cloud, but I'm not quite sure if they're using it quite the same way. So Google Cloud will allow you to put your data up there and have files up there, but you have to pull them down to work on them. Panzura caches that data locally so that it's right there ready for you to work on, and manages file locking. So if you're in one file at a time and another person is in wants to get in that file, they're going to find it's being locked. If it's if it's a native Google Cloud like Google Docs or things like that, Google manages that for you and manages those. But the applications that aren't native to Google is things that we can we can help you with and manage the locking and things like that. All your CAD applications, Adobe software. That's the other thing, is we're agnostic to any vendor. I mean, we support all of Autodesk products, but we support all of Adobe's and all your other systems as well. So your marketing department, I'm sure Dan mentioned, you know, it wasn't just the project teams that are working on architecture projects that need to collaborate. Probably puts all of his data up there now. So marketing and finance and everybody has the ability to read and write to us, and we can store their data up in the cloud and store it securely. The other part of that is you own the data. You create a bucket up there in the cloud. We read and write to that bucket, we encrypt it, we dedupe it, and we compress it before we write it up there. So by the time it gets written up there, if anybody even got a hold of all your data up there, it would just look like garbage to them. We have a government level security encryption so that we actually have a lot of government agencies choose us because of our ability to do that encryption. But anybody that got the keys to your bucket of data would just see garbage from their perspective.
And Greg, one thing I thought was interesting too to note, a real differentiator I think in Panzura is its ability to handle a lot of those architectural specific applications that we use, like Revit, like the Adobe InDesign and other files. You know, that's really sort of the sweet spot. We're not talking about Word, Excel, and sort of the typical smaller files that, you know, you could put into OneDrive or come up with other solutions. It's dealing with the ones that, you know, architects like to think we're special, but yeah, we do use a lot of complicated large file sets, whether it be Point Cloud and Rhino and Revit. There's a lot of those files, and it's really important to us that those are the types of files that we need to be able to share. It's not the simple Word, Excel files. It's the tougher ones. Those are the ones that are important to us.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying. And I know Greg asked what is the future now for Payette as far as like how you would see your collaboration, you know, beyond the pandemic. But can we maybe do a quick look back, because there's some people asking, What was it like when you heard when it was locked down? Again, Boston was what, early March. Can you give us a sneak peek? What was that like, and how did you serve a one office location to, what are you now, 180?
Yeah, so it was specifically, if I remember, it was Friday, March 13th, and I think Friday the 13th, just last week, noted what that was now 8 months of this, and it really became one of those situations that not everyone had a mobile device, not everyone had, because we use a lot of powerful workstations to run a lot of what we do, and then we do a lot of high-end rendering and Enscape for virtual reality. So we're talking about a lot of like heavy lifting applications, and those aren't a quick, easy thing that you can just say, here, everybody scatter. So it really is never one answer fits all either. And oftentimes I look at it and I go, each situation was a little bit of, well, it depends. It depends on what's right for that project team. And that's sort of how we looked at it, is we really looked at it and said, what are the projects that are in construction right now, and that we know that those teams are going to continue to operate as they are and they're good. But then there's a bunch that are in early stages of design or mid stages of design. Those are very important to us, that we need to achieve the deliverables that we're set, contractually. We can't let a client down. We know we need to hit those targets. How do we do those? And that's when it becomes, okay, what's the mobile technology that we can leverage? What's the cloud technology that we can leverage, and start to execute and run those applications in the cloud, but still access the same data that we have on-prem. And that's where it really became important to us to say, okay, these are the workloads that we know we can start up virtual workstations in the cloud. We can install the applications. We can have it talking, back to our own license servers. We can have it accessing that same data that's in the office. And that's where it really sort of helped us extend what we had internally, externally, to support those mobile people.
That sounds great. Thank you. And then, in fact, I actually just ask our audience, what was their own transition experience, right? Was it as seamless as Payette's office had been? And don't you wish you have a Dan Gallivan at your organization? And what was that scenario like? But I think I've caught up with some of the questions from the audience right now. Greg, if you want to continue the conversation.
Actually, Greg, I would have a quick question for you. Is there anything on Panzura's roadmap at the moment that you would say, that we should be looking for, or things that are might be changing in the near future?
Right. So there's so much coming. I wish I could tell you all about it. Unfortunately I can't. There's certain things I know are coming, and then I can talk about, and then there are certain things we're planning to do. But some of the things we're talking about, our mobile solution is something that gives you access to all of your files from mobile devices, right? It's your phones, your tablets, things that aren't meant to really run an application, but sometimes you just want to read a document on the train ride home. You're out on the field, you're out at a construction site, and you forgot a document or something, and you can access it. So that's there now, but we're going to continue to enhance that to really provide another type for those people who don't want to run VDI up in the cloud, want to work on a file, but also be able to lock it. We're coming up with a way to lock a file through a mobile device, whether it's your laptop running a browser, you check the file out, or if you're on your phone and it's something you can edit on your phone and push back up. If it's an image, maybe it's an image you edit with Photoshop on. My daughter runs Adobe Photoshop on her iPad. I'm not into Adobe Photoshop, but boy, she does it, and she moves files all over the place, right? And so you'll be able to take these down, make changes, mark them up, push them back up, but keep them locked while you're doing that work. So you're not overwriting other people's work using our mobile solution. That's one of the things coming. There's a whole lot coming at the platform level that's not so specific to AEC, but things we're enhancing there. And we're coming up with more and more collaborations with third parties that are going to be able to interface with Panzura and provide you a user interface that gives you the ability to look at your data on Panzura in a different way. Panzura is often, when we started, I always use this as a pushing point for people like Dan. I would come in and I would say, you can implement Panzura, but you don't have to retrain your users to do anything, right? They're going to use the applications just like they always did. So we specifically stayed away from having a Windows plugin that you needed on your Windows or your Mac to be able to access the Panzura. All you had to do to access the Panzura was map a drive to the share like any other server. So we always stayed away from that, but the side effect of that over the years has been that when we want to present users with some sort of information about the Panzura, we have nothing on the desktop to say, hey, this is, your administrator took the machine down, it's not online, you're having a communication problem, there's a network issue between two offices, anything like that. We have no way to do that. So we're enabling this through other parties that might have a desktop present agents running that can identify, or you can develop your own agents that are able to do that and provide that ability. So we're building APIs and things into our product that enable that outside source to be much more customizable. We also have something we sell right now called Vision. It is being rebranded as Panzura Data Services. And this will look at all of the data on your server. Do you want to know who's been accessing what, when, how often, how much of your data is hot, meaning it's regularly turned over in 7 days, how much of it is kind of warm, that hasn't been touched in 7 to 30 days maybe, and how much of it is just flat out cold, And so you can look and analyze that a lot better, maybe take some of the advantages of colder storage up in Azure and Amazon and Google for longer term storage and archiving and things. And all those things are coming down the pipe that are just going to provide a much better solution for people like Dan and IT, but also a better experience for end users just trying to get their work done.
Actually, Greg, all of those sound great. And in fact, they're actually kind of funny because they were all top things that I would be very interested in. One, the Panzura Mobile, that sounds perfect. And as you mentioned, people have many different devices, especially when they're working on the field and they're using iPads and they're trying to get to data from there. Maybe it's just to view something, so maybe it's not really creating or editing content at that time, but it's just consuming that content or viewing something. You need to pull up a report or a drawing, whatever it might be. So Panzura Mobile sounds exactly like that. And one of the things you touched upon too is a user experience. User experience needs to be very consistent with how they work from device to device, whether it be in the office or at home, and having that consistent. And then the one that I was very excited about too is that sort of reporting dashboard. I always sort of think about it, that aspect of, a pilot doesn't fly a plane without a dashboard.
Yeah.
How can we make business decisions, whether it be about data, without having that visibility into what you actually have? So I know that's very important to people in my sort of situation, but most everybody, you really do need to have a good visibility dashboard about what data you have, what's being accessed, and what data types you have. So that's very important.
Yeah, and searching the data is becoming a top priority for us as well. From the end user perspective, being able to find, one of the things we found is if you have 5 offices and you had 10 terabytes in each office, those people knew where to go for their data in their office, right? And then you took that 5 to 10 terabytes and stuffed it up in the cloud. Now you have 50 terabytes. And end user, and it all got meshed together with everybody else's data. And then end user said, now I need to find a file and I'm looking through 50 terabytes of data. And so being able to search, one of those data services things we're providing is being able to search that data, be able to find what you need, and be able to open that up to other parties that can build really good, very specific search tools for the specific application you're building or the way you work, the way you find data for a particular type of project or things like that. It's very difficult for a company like ours to try and meet everybody's need and the way they do their work. Architecture firms are actually fairly unique in that some of your IP is just a process you go through in putting a building together, right? Yes. And so that process is something that's unique to every firm. And for us to try and provide services for everybody to do that the way they do it is difficult. So we're really starting to build out our APIs so that you can build out your own process and way to do this. And so, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun in the near future.
Yep. No, you mentioned that we often think about that. The IP is not necessarily like in taking a copy of our building or a set of plans. It's how we got to that. It's the intellectual knowledge that produced that you really can't capture. And it is, as I mentioned, a collaborative effort. And then I always refer to people looking for files as like a kid opening the refrigerator door and going, oh, I don't see anything, and they're just closing it. You really need good tools to go and dig deep for what you have in that data. And as it keeps growing exponentially, we only have more to sort through. So.
Yep.
And I'm just following up with a few of the questions here. Some of them were asking if we could share the recording. And obviously we would. We would have it on our website under tech resources in a couple of days, as soon as Miriam has edited down a bit. But one of the other questions was like also trying to find a deeper dive into like how is that user interface, and we didn't really plan to do a show and tell of like how the Panzura works, but that's something we can set up for you guys. And I also will post in a link on our website for a previous recording that did do that, which is a deeper dive into the product and the workflow, right? I think it's also something that Dan had done in the past, so we can share that with you. But the other question though is more about, I guess I was just curious to find out, Dan, in the projects you have, I know it's a big organization, but how is the design process working out with this new collaboration and working from elsewhere, not just home?
Yeah, it's interesting. The president of our firm said it recently well to everybody, and he said, what used to be a 3-person, 30-minute conversation in the design studio can now turn into a 2-hour, 12-person web meeting event, and it is different. And we need to find ways, and it's not just sharing the data, but as Greg was mentioning, it's sharing the idea and the process of how we got there. And just as we're almost talking today and learning about things, it's trying to leverage that technology so that people can continue to remain in constant communication. And it's not necessarily using email or using a chat method, but maybe while they're working, they'll have open calls so that if a thought hits them, they can say, oh, can you take a look at this with me, and just continue. So it's really trying to replicate that office experience. I know myself, as I said, I do come into the office a bit and I try to spend, but I actually mirrored my office physical layout to my home office so that it felt very natural to me. And I would say for people, try to do things like that. And just as like when I'm in the office and I can talk to my own IT group and talk to them on a daily basis of checking in, we do the same thing externally, and we find our design teams do the same thing. We have shifted what used to be a lot of our in-office knowledge sharing components. So almost any day in the office would have a different project being reviewed or pinned up. Those have all gone online. So now we're doing those same exact things that we did in the office, we're doing on a consistent basis on a regular same schedule, and it's oftentimes a hybrid. So there'll be some people in the office that are participating and joining, and then there's some people that will be outside of the office. So it's a good mix. One of the great things about actually doing it now on the web is we're able to record those and share them. So it sort of becomes a little bit of it grows a repository of events that people can refer to and go, hey, what was the comment that someone made about that particular design? And the team can go back and look at it. So we found that to be very beneficial. But that's one thing I would say is we're looking forward towards the future is more of that hybrid approach with the different technology that we're using.